So it's time to start practicing some exam questions. So have a go at this one. This is a 6-mark answer. So this is one of the long, detailed questions where your quality of written communication matters. So you need to be very clear, very organised and very logical in the way you write this down. So try this. Plants and animals have become adapted in many different ways to survive in different environments. Describe these adaptations, giving examples of animals and plants adapted in the way you describe. So let's have a look at the mark scheme. For the highest marks, 5 or 6 marks, you should give clear, detailed descriptions of a range of plants and animals, and your answer should make it clear how these adaptations help them to survive. So animals adapted for survival in dry and Arctic environments, for example polar bear or Arctic fox, may have a small surface area to volume ratio. How does this adaptation help them to survive? It's by reducing the rate of heat loss. They may have a thick coat. This increases insulation, thereby reducing the rate of heat loss. They may have a thick layer of body fat. This also increases insulation, reducing the rate of heat loss. So you can see how I've made it clear how these adaptations help them to survive. Plants adapted for survival in dry environments, for example cacti, may have reduced surface area of the leaves. This reduces the rate of water loss by evaporation. Some of them, in cacti, have reduced their leaves to spines. They may have water storage tissues, such as swollen stems, and this will enable them to survive for longer without water. They may have extensive root systems. This allows them to collect water over a wider area. Carbon is continually cycled in nature. Use your own knowledge to explain in detail how carbon is cycled. Another 6-marker. So let's look at the mark scheme. For the highest marks, 5 or 6 marks, you should give clear, detailed explanations of the cycling of carbon in nature. You should include most of the points below. Carbon is removed from the atmosphere by green plants and algae in photosynthesis. Plants and algae use the carbon to make fats, proteins and carbohydrates. Green plants and algae release CO2 into the atmosphere when they respire. When plants and algae are eaten by animals, some of the carbon becomes part of the animals' bodies. The animals respire and release CO2 into the atmosphere. When plants and animals die, their tissues are broken down by decomposers or microbes. The microbes respire and release CO2 into the atmosphere. Microbes return other substances to the soil as plant nutrients. And when wood and fossil fuels are combusted, they release CO2 into the atmosphere too. How are new drugs tested for safety, efficacy and toxicity? Mark scheme, they're tested on cells, tissues or live animals in the laboratory. Very low doses are then tested on healthy volunteers and patients. There will be further clinical trials to find the correct dose, and they may be tested in double-blind trials where neither the patient nor the doctor knows who has the placebo and who has the drug. What is a placebo? A placebo is an equivalent treatment which doesn't contain the drug, but it's administered in the same way. Read the following information about the use of hormones in contraceptive pills. The combined pill is a contraceptive pill containing estrogen and progesterone, which prevents pregnancy. It works by preventing an egg from maturing. It's taken every day for 21 days, and then the woman stops for 7 days, resuming on the 8th. It's an effective method of contraception when taken properly, Side effects can include blood clots, nausea, headaches, and an increased risk of breast cancer, although long-term use has been shown to reduce the risk of ovarian cancer. The mini pill contains progesterone only and is equally effective at preventing pregnancy. It's taken every single day of a 28-day cycle, but it must be taken at the same time each day, or at least within 3 hours of that time. There's no link between the mini pill and blood clots or breast cancer, but it does not provide any protection against ovarian cancer. Evaluate the use of the two types of drug for a woman wishing to prevent pregnancy. So for an evaluate question, you have to give both sides of the coin. You have to say, well, this drug does this, but this one doesn't. Mark scheme. Both types of pill are effective at preventing pregnancy. The woman has to remember to take the combined pill again after a 1-week break, but she would take the mini pill every day. There's that direct comparison then, the bit after but. This drug does this, but this drug does something different. The woman has to remember to take the mini pill within a 3-hour time frame, but this isn't the case with the combined pill. This is that direct comparison again. The combined pill increases the risk of breast cancer, but the mini pill does not. The combined pill increases the risk of blood clots, but the mini pill does not. Long-term use of the combined pill provides protection against ovarian cancer, but the mini pill does not. All those points are needed for the mark. Explain how plant shoots are able to grow towards sources of light. Auxin is unequally distributed in the shoot. There's a greater concentration of auxin on the shaded side. The shaded side of the shoot grows at a faster rate, growing towards the light. Explain how some bacteria have become resistant to antibiotics. Some bacteria mutate, or there is genetic variation in the population. This may make them resistant, not immune to the antibiotic. If you say immune, you can't have that mark. The antibiotic kills the non-resistant bacteria, but the resistant bacteria survive and reproduce, so the population of resistant bacteria increases. Why must school cultures of microbes be incubated at no more than 25 degrees? This reduces the chance of harmful pathogens growing. A boy's brother caught measles, but the boy did not. He had received a vaccination against the disease as a toddler. Explain how the vaccine gave him immunity to measles. The vaccine introduced a small amount of dead or inactivated pathogen. This stimulated white blood cells to produce antibodies against measles. On next exposure to the measles pathogen, the boy was able to make the correct antibodies rapidly and in large numbers. The pathogen was destroyed before it was able to reproduce. A technology company has produced a genetically modified strain of wheat plants which are resistant to a particular type of fungal disease. The gene allows the plant to produce an enzyme which destroys the fungus. Explain how the gene was introduced into the wheat plants. The gene for the enzyme was cut out of the fish DNA using enzymes. The gene was transferred to the wheat DNA using enzymes. The modified wheat DNA was then inserted back into the wheat cells and the wheat cells were grown on into plants. The following food chain was studied. The annual flow of energy through the food chain was calculated. The values are all in kilojoules per square metre. So the sunlight fell on the grass plants, bringing 3.9 times 10 to the power 6 kilojoules per square metre. 3,300 kilojoules per square metre were passed on to the plant-eating insects, 290 to the insect-eating invertebrates, and 12 to the hedgehog. The amount of energy transferred to the hedgehog was different from the amount transferred to the insect-eating invertebrates. Explain why. Energy was lost by the insect-eating invertebrates as feces or waste was excreted. Energy was lost by the insect-eating invertebrates by respiration or heat or movement or muscle contraction, all the same mark. Some of the insect-eating invertebrate was not eaten, but all or more or most of the insects were eaten. Explain how a sharp pain in the finger causes the hand to be pulled away quickly from a pin. The receptor detects the stimulus. The impulse travels along the sensory neuron towards the CNS, to the relay neuron, then to the motor neuron. It crosses the synapse between the sensory and relay gap or between the relay and motor neuron gap, and the effector or the muscle contracts or pulls away. The graph shows the incidence of various forms of mental illness in a population. Evaluate the evidence for a link between cannabis use and mental illness. So evaluating evidence here means you have to find some evidence that suggests there is a link, but you also have to find evidence that perhaps disputes that, and maybe see if you can find some experimental limitations. What haven't they looked at in this? So whenever you get a graph question, just stop yourself for a minute before you answer it and look very, very carefully at the labels on the axes. Now, what does this graph talk about? Is it about the number of people, as in number, or is it about percentages in people? Are the numbers in thousands, or in millions, or in individual people? Look very, very carefully. Cannabis users are more likely to suffer from all kinds of mental illness studied, but it has a greater effect on some illnesses than others. For example, it's 2.8 times higher for depression, but 8 times higher for anxiety. And there's no information given about any other drugs taken, or the length of their dependency, or the ages, sexes of the population.